mentioned when your registration was also being done, that it was just to make sure that the last letter is N, isn't it? Yeah. So just conscious of that fact. Because here in the UK, obviously, what you'll find is that a lot of them, hi, this is me. A lot of them, normally shorten your name into an alias. And this tends to be a trend here in the UK for most names. So if you have a long name, or if you have a first name and a middle name and a last name, they'll pick up the one which they feel, is the best or the shortest one for you to be able to address. And that's where
I know. Yeah, most of my family is in the UK also, so I'm used to that.
Oh, you're used to that. So do they not call you with a nickname or an alias? And sometimes, it becomes the first.
Yeah, I mean, like my close family, they have a nickname for me, but other than that, I don't think you can really generate a nickname for Mamin.
All right, okay, no worries. But I don't know, in some of the cases, my kids, I know with the age of AI and ChatGPT, this is something which I've got them to work with and install on their phone and, their Mac, is because I think whatever they do, they will not be able to escape, artificial intelligence, the current generation. And you'll be surprised if you type something into it and say, can you suggest an alias for my name? It'll come up with a lot of things. My daughter's name is Jazz, and her full name is actually Jazz, Nihal, and Mac. So it came up with, a small initial. It says, your name is quite unique, but here's a suggestion. I hope you like it. You should be initialed as JS or JM.
Oh, nice.
So ChatGPT obviously, will come up with various options, but yeah, it's something which is sometimes we have a laugh, and we discuss. We say, okay, what's new that you've discovered today, and they come up with lots of things. I did this today, so yeah, it's a good laugh at the end of the day when you're having dinner with them on the table. So what did it suggest today? And sometimes it's hilarious. So that's where this thing comes across. And Tuba, your name is also very unique. I don't know whether you've noticed, but a lot of us, I don't know in terms of cartoon characters. There's a very famous cartoon character which is Tuba, and so obviously your spelling of your name is T-O-O, and that is T-U-B-A. So it obviously rhymes.
Sir, I'm not aware of the cartoon character.
It is a cartoon character, a very famous cartoon character called Tuba, T-U-B-A. So obviously, I know it's spelled very differently, T-O-O-P-A, but if you were to be in the UK or in any other countries in Europe, they'll instantly recognize you. Okay, were you named after the character Tuba? And they'll ask you this question in any case.
No, sir, I wasn't named after the cartoon character. I think my grandfather named me, and I'm not sure about it, although.
That's absolutely fine. I think sometimes here in the UK, you discuss more about the weather, and sometimes people discuss about names and aliases. So this tends to be the first, conversation which basically begins with most people if they are meeting each other for the first time. So just a thought, for a passing thought, just to process, but nothing important, nothing serious. Okay, so let's start with our session with regards to what we are discussing. And today we are going to be looking at learning outcome 4, which is focused on, essentially managing what are the various strategies that if you were an HR manager within a company, then what are the various strategies you would be using to basically manage your workforce, keep them motivated, keep them happy. For example, work-life balance is something which comes up quite often today. And it's hilarious because simply because I did an article yesterday in LinkedIn, which should be published, I think, today on our blog page, which will say work-life balance and various things within Versity. So there are bits and pieces that we and every company looks at from a point of view of trying to manage and keep and retain and keep their workforce motivated. And one of the things that we're going to learn today is in terms of some of the tools and techniques that can be utilized essentially to manage the workforce diversity, because there are people now working within organizations from different cultures, from different backgrounds. They come with varied type of experiences. And I think sometimes it becomes, a can of worms for somebody who's in the HR to manage so much in terms of diversity within large organizations. So some of the ones that we do talk about, things like Facebook, LinkedIn, a couple of others, which are, organizations which have thousands of employees, you generally see that this sometimes tends to be a sore or a burning issue. And even within the NHS, when we look at, there are 44 various different nationalities of individuals which work, which makes up the National Health Service in the UK. And they come from, I think, if not, this is, I'm not sure about, but maybe 25, 30 different countries. And sometimes who's the director of HR or director of, human resource development, it becomes very difficult for them to be able to manage, expectations. And that is where the policies and, the processes which are defined within an organization, are utilized from a point of view of ensuring that you are able to effectively work, deal, and also manage your workforce. So we are going to be looking at 3 assessment criteria in general, which is one talking about the significance of cultural diversity. Why is it very important when we look at an organization? And if in the UK, if you look at briefly classification of organizations, if you have up to 10 employees, you're a micro business. If you are between 11 to 200, 11 to 50 employees, you're a small business. And if you're between 51 to 250, then it's a small medium enterprise. If anything more than 250 employees tends to be a large corporation or a large, classified as a large company or a public sector corporation, and PLC. So in large organizations or places wherein you have lots of people employed, like the National Health Service, which will be in the largest, the furthest category, which is public sector enterprise, there the importance of managing cultural diversity will be, an important factor. It will be something which people will have to come to and get to grips with to be able to, retain employees, the best talent that they want to retain within the organization. The second one talks about benefits. What are the benefits of organizations employing diverse workforce? That means people coming from different backgrounds, values, beliefs, cultures, race, religion. And if they form your workforce or they work within your organization, then what are the advantages of employing diverse workforce today? They come with different skill sets, different capabilities, understanding of different cultures, and that helps the organization to a certain extent manage, their consumer and customer expectations. So obviously we look at some of the advantages on that side. And last but not the least, it also asks us to cover what are the strategies. So here we need to assess. I mean, we need to come up with some strategies and assess how, if you are wearing the hat of, say, for example, the HR manager or the HR officer of a particular company wherein you have lots of people employed in the organization from different places or different cultures, then how would you, in this case, manage a diverse workforce? So these are the 3 important bits that we need to be looking at covering today in our discussion. And what we'll do is, as always, to start our discussion with a bit of discussion using a few PowerPoint presentation slides. And let me just shift you over to the slides. So here we are going to be looking at discussing bits in terms of, I'm going to switch on the video right now because obviously what it does is obviously bloats up the, recording file from a point of view of when we have to share the recordings, because it's recording both video and voice. So I'll keep switching on and off in between. So if we look at here, again, the learning outcome focuses on understand. It is not be able to. So we will not need to go into a lot of detail to be able to define and create a lot of strategies. But essentially what we have to do is theoretically study and not apply some of these. But again, when I say theoretically study, we would need to understand how these strategies could be applied in managing a diverse workforce. Some of the indicative content that we need to cover, which will include things like what is cultural diversity. This is an important term that we will look at primarily from a point of view of just bringing ourselves to grip with in terms of the terminology. And we will also be looking at what is equal opportunity, because this is something that will be used quite often when we talk about in general employing people within the organization. And sometimes people do say that I'm not, will I be given equal opportunities to progress in the career, or will I be getting opportunities, to put things into practice, or my experience into practice. And those are the bits that we will need to look at, in terms of equal opportunity. So when we talk about equal opportunity, there is a law and an act in the UK, which is the Equalities and Diversities Act, or Equalities Act of 2010. And, when we talk about equal opportunities, we will be looking at just briefly dipping into talking about the Equalities Act of 2010 as well. And the reason why we want to do this is because some part of it tends to be the legislation and compliance that we need to know. And this at a later stage, if there are any grievance or, any sort of, let's say, complaints issues which arise because, and these could be employment issues which arise because of either grievances or complaints from the workforce, then the HR person should be acquainted, let's me put it this way, well acquainted with the legislation and regulation, which is basically the acts, so that you are able to address that particular query or that issue or that problem appropriately. We'll also be looking at talking about what is employee welfare. This is an important term, especially when we look at coming out of COVID, simply because work-life balance, as I mentioned to you earlier, has become an important facet within most, HR-related operations. And here the concept of work-life balance or employee welfare essentially will be coming in. And that would involve, things like companies sometimes, provide things like private medical insurance, yoga classes, gym memberships, excursions and events which typically happen within the, within, for example, the organization from time to time. And they tend to be, the examples of, employee welfare. We look at certain terms which will include things like role modeling, which is a common practice and a common term which you will come across in HRM in particular, not in health and social care, but in general across the field of human resources management. And this tends to be a practice which is used for identifying and, obviously showcasing exemplary behavior and attitude. So sometimes you say she's a role model in the organization or he's a role model in the organization, and the company looks at, basically basing some of the, let's say, motivational aspects of it, or in terms of inspirational aspects of it, when they have to look at them, let's like what I'll put it this way, when they have to employ and talk about how to get people to recognize that this is the best benchmark, or this is the best role model, or this is the best way to do this particular job. They will then use the process of role modeling to basically, describe something which has been done by another, or let's say an employee within the organization, and that could be inspirational, or somebody who could be a role model. And those would be terms coming across to when we discuss role modeling. Effective communication, I think clearly understood. Communication tends to be the key. You don't want any ambiguity. You want everybody in the company to sing from the same songbook. You want the instructions to be clear. You want the policies, processes to be clear, so that they are not open to interpretation. And that is where effective communication comes in handy. Team building, obviously HR does a lot of training events and activities around team building. And this is a regular activity of the HR calendar across the year in most organizations, wherein they look at doing team bonding exercises or activities which will lead to better working of people or subordinates within a particular department, and that helps to improve efficiency and productivity within the organization. And then we look at obviously the process of taking feedback. So constructive feedback could be done through appraisals, 360-degree feedback from peers, subordinates, superiors, customers, partners, suppliers, and obviously the accountability part of it and shared values, which are part and parcel of the HRM, or let's say the employee handbook within an organization. And some of them originate from the vision and mission of the organization, and obviously the job descriptions and the roles which will hold the person accountable at the end of the day when it comes to appraising or apprising the individual, of some of the let's say, the functions that they have been able to perform during the course of the year. And let's look at some key terminology. So one of the key bits that we want to understand is that the learning outcome talks about what are the various strategies, of managing a diverse workforce. So when we talk about, the term which is the cultural diversity, and in essence talk about diversity in general, what we are basically meaning by that is that it's the existence of, various types of cultures or ethnic groups within the organization, and that emphasizes or shows or basically tells us that there are people which work within the organization which come from different background. They have different values and beliefs. Some of them come and have a different type of, they have different religious beliefs. And in those cases, the organization needs to develop a tolerance or have a policy through which they are able to ensure that there is no discrimination or, discrimination is vetted out, or in some cases needs to ensure that it deals with people from various backgrounds, beliefs, values, cultures, race, religion in an equal and just manner or way. And that would be basically looking at, cultural diversity. Now, when we talk about equal opportunities, as I mentioned to you earlier, it is that everyone has the right to be treated fairly. And when I say fairly, the opposite of that would be discriminatory. That means nobody wants to be discriminated against. Nobody wants to be left out. And that is where the HR policies on, equal opportunity essentially ensure that, people are not, they are basically treated fairly and equally. And they are also not, while dealing and while discussing or while including them in various activities, operations, roles and responsibilities of the company, their values, beliefs, race, religion, age, disability is not taken into account. And that would essentially mean that the employer is looking at dealing with its staff and providing them equal opportunities. Now, when we talk about managing a diverse workforce, we need to be able to look at what could be the broad strategies or ways in which, senior management or people in the senior positions are able to manage this and manage it effectively. So there are some of the points that are related to this, which we will just touch very briefly, which allow us to understand that how you can manage the workforce. So if I look at asking you to, chip in and contribute, why do you think you are able to manage certain situations or certain tasks quite well? Any ideas? Why do you think in some situations or given certain tasks, you're able to manage things, quite well?
So the situations might be we're already aware about or we have worked on that before.
Absolutely. So your prior experience or experience of having faced that particular issue, problem, situation beforehand prepares you, or at least gives you some insight in terms of how you need to work around or deal with those situations. So similarly, if you've had years, if you extrapolate that, and if you say that you've had years of experience of managing this, or years of experience in terms of dealing with these kind of situations, then this gives you an edge over other colleagues or maybe some of the other peers that you work with within the organization. And given an opportunity, this is something that you will be preferred to in terms of taking up that particular role or taking up that responsibility. So at some stage, it'll be okay for us to generalize and say that people with, experience within a particular field and a particular type of situation. For example, if the hospital or if your company or organization decides that we are now going to set up international operations, and if they have somebody within the organization who has come from a background wherein they have managed and dealt with various types of setups or offices or branches in different locations, that person could become a favored or a preferred person to be able to go and establish the international operations for that company, because that person might have prior experience, and prior experience would give them skills to be able to replicate that particular activity again for this organization. So in some cases, these people will move into what are called leadership positions, and these people who are more experienced have prior knowledge and it could be knowledge both in terms of academic skills, their experience, tacit or passive knowledge, which will allow them essentially to take up that role, and that would allow the company also the confidence to be able to say, okay, we're in good hands, and this person is capable and should be able to set up the operations internationally as an example successfully. So when we look at the tools which are used, or situations in which we are able to manage and manage a diverse workforce, we are looking at examples of people who would be looking at having leadership qualities which would come from prior experience, background, and obviously academic background. They will also be looking at in some cases able to manage the workforce because they have worked within different environments, and these different environments provide them cultural sensitivity to be able to develop awareness about what the requirements or nuances of the cultural requirements are, and that allows them to adjust to be able to then manage that diversity within the workforce. It could also be that people have had training, and that training has helped them build awareness, or they have been culturally made aware of some of these nuances. And because you're aware of these situations or nuances, that is where you are able to better adapt to be able to manage that diversity if that is to happen, or if you're working and dealing with a diverse workforce. Now, similarly, we could look at going through a couple of points, but these would also be covered in detail as we go along into the assessment criteria. But generally speaking, here the context is to understand why and how do we manage a diverse workforce. So sometimes people with good skills, number of years of experience, and when I say number of years of experience, but similar experience of working within another setup allows them to step into a leadership role and manage a diverse workforce. They are also culturally aware, and they have been in trainings or have had the opportunity to join trainings wherein they understand if these conflicts arise, or if confusion, or if, let's say, arguments are to arrive and happen within a diverse workforce, then how would these need to be resolved? And that would be because they have had awareness and training, previously, or awareness and training, which has allowed them to become equipped with the tools to be able to discuss and diffuse some of these situations if they were to let's say fall into the trap of dealing with, let's say, diverse workforce. Now, the other bits which you could also look at is that companies sometimes could develop what are called flexible policies, because if we know that like in the case of National Health Service, coming back to the health and social care context, in the case of National Health Service, it is known that the NHS is having a diverse workforce of 1.3 million people who work within the National Health Service. There are different nationalities, there are people from different backgrounds, and it is a well-known fact that NHS is multicultural, very diverse, and the workforce itself comes, the workforce has a tremendous amount of diversity because people come from different background, race, religion, culture, countries, and have different values and beliefs. So in these cases, as an organization, they have recognized this firsthand, and they have developed flexible policies that accommodate these diverse needs. And this would mean things like flexible working hours, sometimes remote working options. It could also mean religious accommodations. Like in some cases, within the NHS, you have the you have the facility of prayer rooms, because we understand that certain people from certain backgrounds would need to pray, and there the provision of prayer rooms has been created over the years because the workforce is diverse. And this is one way of the organization looking at inclusion, ensuring that people feel welcomed and people feel that they have all the things available to be able to work within the organization, and the organization understands their values, beliefs, and their cultural diversities. You could also have regular trainings which are done within the organization, and these trainings are basically done as what are called inclusive training, and these trainings are done primarily to raise awareness of, say, the cultural sensitivities of different peers and subordinates which work within the organization. For example, if the organization is to take on somebody who's coming from a very different background and a culture, and at some stage they feel that this person who has joined will benefit from, if there's a bit of an awareness training which is done with other employees to make them understand, and this would make this person feel more welcomed and would be able to accommodate and adjust and gel well with the organization, because the HR has taken initiatives to raise awareness of the cultural sensitivities of this person, because he's a new addition to the family and obviously comes from a diverse culture or from a different background altogether, which has never been employed within the organization, or people from that background have not been employed previously in the company or in their organization. And then we look at a lot of data collection mechanisms. Sometimes you would see that people, HR is also tasked with the job of collecting and monitoring data. So at the end of the day, when you look at, sometimes when you fill up certain questionnaires, they ask you about your ethnicity, your nationality. This is basically ways of collecting demographic data, which is to understand where you come from, what is your age, what is your background, what is your religion, what is your first language. And the reason why the company is looking at doing, or the organization is looking at doing it, is because they're looking at regularly monitoring and measuring, the initiatives that they take for inclusion of all people from diverse backgrounds within the society or within the organization. And these would be useful, for the individuals working within the organization. And this analysis is normally done when feedback, is collected, or when data is collected and it's monitored, and it is used for, drawing out meaningful conclusions. That means, okay, how many nationalities do we have working within the organization? How many different types of religion do we have people which work within the organization? And these are data points, and essentially they would be useful for the HR, because this will help them in managing and understanding the nuances involved in managing a diverse workforce within any organization or within a particular setup or an organization in any place, in any country or any geography. Is that okay? Any questions?
Yes, sir.
Okay, let's do and watch a quick video, which is basically to understand where diversity and inclusion, and what does it mean, and how does a company look at, say, for example, I'm taking an example of an organization in the UK called Randstad, and how does this organization actually look at celebrating diversity and inclusion, and what are the various initiatives the HR takes in order to ensure that anybody who joins the organization feels included. And they would essentially look at doing this as an exercise, because it will help the individuals settle well within the organization, but at the same point in time, it will allow the organization to derive financial benefits, because they are ensuring that the organization is able to take care of the requirements of these individuals by understanding their culture. And this could lead to better financial results, for the organization from a point of view of business and how most people work within the company. So let's listen into this short video.
Did you know companies with diverse workforces are likely to have better financial returns than those that don't? Can your organization benefit from a stronger culture of diversity and inclusion? Hi, I'm Audrey Jenkins, Chief Diversity and Inclusion Officer for Randstad, and I'd like to take a moment to highlight how our D&I strategy can make the difference for your business. In today's highly competitive labor market, employers everywhere are struggling to fill roles, but with a strong D&I strategy, you can help ease talent scarcity. You can enhance access to a broader range of talent, as well as simultaneously lifting your employer brand to help you attract more qualified candidates. McKinsey research shows diverse workforces outperform their peers by as much as 1/3. Promoting diverse opinions and insights leads to greater innovation and ideas to drive organizational performance. So the benefits of diverse and inclusive culture are clear for your business and your workforce. Now, I'd like to share how Randstad practices what we preach. It's our approach to D&I throughout our global organization. In our workplace and in the market and across the business, we strive to ensure inclusive representation in every possible way. We do this internally for our clients, suppliers, and other important partners. At Randstad, we've created a culture of inclusion through mentorship programs, resources, and engaging content for employees and candidates. We have been recognized by organizations such as Diversity Inc., the Greater Women's Business Council, and Regional Minority Supplier Development Councils for our leadership in this space. We also support various initiatives such as Hire Hope, which is a program that empowers underserved women. And we develop and deliver a robust supplier diversity programs for many clients. As part of our effort to help our nation's proudest, Randstad has developed a strong pipeline of veteran talent and a dedicated on-staff veteran solution strategist to bring former members of their military, their spouses, and employers together. We've created an inclusive global culture here by taking the actions that we often advise clients to take in their D&I strategies. Our focus begins with a comprehensive corporate social responsibility mindset that drives diverse talent practices. Our aim is to improve the work lives of 500 million people around the world by 2030. And we bring that practice expertise to every client that needs us. So how can your organization benefit from our learnings and those of our clients and partners? We're looking forward to working with you to create a D&I strategy and culture that will drive business performance, help you attract and retain talent, and give you a competitive edge. Thank you.
So if you see that this gives you a very good idea in terms of how D&I strategy, as they say, allows companies to basically, do lots of things. So in our video, although it was a very short video, but it basically made a couple of points with regards to how it benefits the organization in terms of having this strategy. So they're able to have a competitive edge. They're able to get, people to perform. They're able to basically attract the best talent as far as, the market is concerned. And obviously they are able to utilize, the understanding of various cultures within with the usage of the diversity and inclusion policy, which allows the organization to put things into place. And that things in terms, when I things into place is what I mean by that is resources into place, which allows the individuals to use those resources and be more productive and obviously, get the work done or, help them meet the targets which are set by the management within the organization. So they, as an organization, look at embracing diversity and inclusion, and they go all out to ensure that anybody that works with them or looks at, being a part of the team, they look at ensuring that they understand what are the requirements, what is the background, and what are the various, let's say, cultural nuances, so that the person feels welcome within their organization, is able to perform and jumpstart into the role from day one, because there's a lot of awareness, a lot of, let's say, background information available to help the person gel and, gel within the organization, fit within the organization, and start performing from day one. So there are lots of such initiatives which the National Health Service has, and any organization with the context of including and having equality and diversity policy within their setup will have, which will allow them to implement that policy to ensure that they are able to, so the policy is essentially a part of a strategy which allows them to essentially ensure, let's put it this way, that they are able to, include people from different backgrounds in as a part of their workforce, and then provide them equal opportunities. And this then allows the organization to help achieve its objectives which have been set for the year, for the quarter, or for the long run. Now, with this background in mind, what we want to be able to do is basically get into some of the assessment criteria. But before we get into some of the assessment criteria, what I also want to do is look at, briefly, just very briefly talking about one or two terms, which is what will help us understand what is cultural diversity. One of the other terms that comes across, is inclusion. So when we talk about inclusion, it goes hand in hand with diversity, because the concept of inclusion actually equates to being equates to an organization taking a bit of a proactive approach in promoting and celebrating diversity of workforce within their setup. So in order to ensure that they are able to, let's say, attract the best possible talent in the organization, sometimes you would see organizations use the word inclusion, and this usually means that the organization is in a state or is basically looking at welcoming or including any member of staff within their own setup which comes from a different or a diverse background, and that would be taken as let me put it this way, as the first step that the organization takes to include them within the organization. And this would help generally create a more harmonious and a productive workforce, because they understand that the person comes from different beliefs and backgrounds, and they would need time to adjust, or for example, we would need to tailor some of the processes to be able to include those preferences, and that in the long run will make the employee more productive and more loyal towards the organization. So sometimes when we talk about the word diversity, we also talk about the word inclusion. Now, in most cases, when we talk about the NHS and we talk about diversity and inclusion within the NHS, there is a big focus on in the NHS as an agenda to look at managing its workforce and providing the workforce with equal opportunities. Now, in the NHS, I want to show you a couple of websites. This is just for reference purposes, because obviously we are looking at studying health and social care. One of the biggest employers within health and social care in the UK is the National Health Service, and it is important for you to understand that what are the initiatives which the NHS actually takes to include diversity and equality and diversity within its workforce. So I'm going to show you a couple of websites which could be websites that you could go to and look at just as a quick bit of read to understand the initiatives and how serious is this initiative taken when we look at talking about the health and social care sector. So if you look at the NHS has what is called a leadership academy, and that leadership academy focuses on ensuring that people who take up senior positions within the National Health Service very clearly understand what is the meaning of inclusion, equality, and diversity. And this particular bit is also translated into what is called the NHS vision on how it manages inclusion, equality, and diversity within the organization. So there is also what is called an Equality and Diversity Council within the NHS, and this council, if I just look at, so this council within the NHS, also looks at defining, what are the various requirements that the individual departments and setups within the NHS have to meet. The last big thing which happened here was looking at the LGBT or LGBT rights, and obviously the inclusion of LGBTs within the workforce, and then being able to provide equal opportunities to people who believe in the concept of LGBT, and that is what was included as a big agenda within the Equality and Diversity Council a couple of years back. Now, these are bits that could give you some additional information when you do go ahead and do read from some of these websites in terms of the overall concept of equality, inclusion, diversity within the NHS, and will give you a bit of an insight into understanding how you would look at managing this if you were in a position to lead the organization. Then why it becomes so important that you are seen as an individual who currently who, say, for example, understands very clearly what is equality, what is diversity, and what is inclusion. Now, going back to the assessment criteria, let's quickly look at some of the assessment criteria, which is what we are going to discuss using the slides. One of the first one talks about the significance of diversity in health and social care sector. Now, why is it important for us to understand this? if I give you a simple example without going into the detailing of the slides, and then we'll go into some of the theoretical aspects. If you look at a patient which comes from a different background, and that patient is being admitted in the hospital for treatment, you would generally see if the patient has, what will happen is in the pre-discussions before the admission into the hospital, the patient will undergo some sort of a consultation to find out whether they're able to speak the language, what is their preference, what are their values and beliefs, what are their needs and wants, and obviously how best the NHS can accommodate these needs and wants, preferences from a point of view of keeping the patient and taking the patient to undergo the treatment for which the patient is being admitted in the hospital. Now, in this case, what will happen is, assuming we have an old lady which is, which is coming in for a cataract operation, and she does English is not her first language. And what we would then interpret pretty much straight away initially during the consultation would be that she might need an interpreter, or a close family member would need to be present with her in order for the family member to be able to do translation in terms of discussions with the nurse or the doctor or the consultant. The second thing that we will look at is the patient. When we look at some sort of operation and clinical procedure, the patient feels a bit shy, or the patient has certain requirements that they would want the doctors and the nurses to be aware of. And in those cases, again, these requirements could be related to, for example, food. For example, the patient could be vegetarian, so they might not be able to have, food like meat, egg, or fish, or any other sort of, non-veg food. They might be vegan. They might have certain allergies or sensitivities to which obviously they would need to make the NHS staff aware. And this bit that I'm looking at in terms of, let's say, understanding from a patient's requirement point of view would be something important for me. And when I say important for me, what I mean by that is important for the organization or the department, or the, the wing in the hospital, which is taking the patient in for treatment. And what they would then do is, if I'm the person who's had the consultation with the patient, I would then look at my staff and go back and say, okay, who do we have similar from that culture? Who do we know that works within the department, which can understand the person's requirement and, basically comes from a similar background. And that would be, looking at putting together a plan which will work, because that person will make, in the presence of that particular person, the person will feel confident, will feel comfortable, and will have no qualms in terms of, discussing openly in terms of, the issues or problems or treatments which the patient is going to go through. And this would be looking at, working with diverse workforce. And if the diverse workforce wasn't there, the person might not be working with the department. And in those cases, the NHS or the hospital would need to hire somebody from outside, which would mean additional cost, time, and other resource-related requirements. So having a diverse workforce, or the workforce which comes from different backgrounds, would help the hospital or the department deal with the patient more effectively, get the patient comfortable quickly. And, in some cases, this would also mean that the patient can, openly and transparently communicate with the staff, thereby the time to recovery or the speed at which the patient recovers from the surgery or the operation would be fastened, or in those cases made easier to a certain extent, because they can rely on somebody and they can speak to somebody in their own language, or say, for example, their own, they understand the culture and their language, and that allows the patient to become a bit more, comfortable in terms of developing a relationship, and thereby making the whole process slightly easier. So when we talk about this from a health perspective, that would mean it would help achieve better patient outcomes, because we know what the patient wants, we know how the patient wants it, we understand the needs and preferences of the patient, and tailoring that plan to meet those preferences would essentially better the patient outcomes by having a diverse workforce. So this would mean that at some stage, the patient would feel no hesitation in discussing openly if there are any issues or problems, and that would make it easier. So similarly, we could discuss some of the other, points, which could be things like how this would involve the patient sometimes, become more comfortable. They say, okay, let's go into this particular place rather than that because I know somebody, someone there. And that makes it easier for them to access, for example, the GP surgery, the hospital, or for example, a pharmacy, because they understand that there are people which work from various communities or different backgrounds, and that would allow them to culturally speak to them freely, and there would be no barriers as far as accessing some of the information is concerned, because they feel comfortable with that particular person. So in general, when we talk about the significance of cultural diversity, this is something that we are getting to see in the benefits that we are getting to see from a perspective of having diverse workforce is, by taking some of these examples and then relating some of these examples to a particular situation allows you to understand some of these points of why it is easier or why is it better, to essentially have a diverse workforce, or, workforce coming from diverse backgrounds within your organization. So in some cases, I would also say some of the points which could include, things like sometimes when the organization is trying to find the best possible talent or recruit the best possible people within the organization to, develop an expertise, sometimes they have to depend on migration, or sometimes they have to look at depending on recruitment from outside. And in those cases, one of the reasons that they want to look at recruitment from outside could be that in certain places or certain cultures, the problems of, say, for example, diabetes or, cardiac related diseases, or, say, cancer related, issues or problems, or their diagnosis is higher than what they generally get to see within their local populations. And in order to bridge or bring somebody across from that background, the company or the organization will essentially look at, recruiting somebody from outside their usual workforce or the circle. And in this case, they would basically go across and bring somebody from a different culture, different background, because they have a first-hand understanding of the problem or the disease or the conditions which a particular type of patients face, and they would help them develop that expertise within the organization. So sometimes changing needs, changing demographics, looking at globalization, and looking at also getting the best possible talent from other locations allows cultural diversity to be introduced within the organization. Is that okay? Any questions on this so far? Okay.
Yes, sir, that is. No questions up till now.
Okay. Let's look at the second criteria, which talks about, what are the benefits of employing culturally diverse workforce. Now, if we look at just for a minute, first, looking at thinking creatively in terms of what are the advantages if you have a diverse workforce within the organization. I'll give you a simple example. Sometimes when we have students which come in and, come in with an inquiry on the phone, for example, or come in to see us at the college, we, try and look at people who can speak the same language. And when we talk about, somebody being able to speak the same language, sometimes it makes a lot of things easier in order to, do away with the hesitation or nervousness or excitement which the people have when they come in to see us. And, sometimes they hesitate in asking questions. So in our team, for example, just to take an example here is, we have a diverse team. So we have somebody who understands and speaks Urdu. We have somebody who understands and speaks French, somebody who speaks and understands English, obviously. But apart from that, they're also able to speak, Bengali. They're able to speak, German, and in some cases, Northwest African languages, which are pretty much, having a common dialect. Now, how does it benefit us? If we have somebody coming in from a particular background, they can strike a conversation straight away by saying, okay, I think I know you from somewhere. So where are you from? Oh, I'm from Nigeria. So which part of Nigeria are you from? And, that way it basically starts that conversation, gets people more comfortable. And essentially, because they're able to relate to somebody who comes from the background or the geography, it makes things easier. It makes them access the information easier, and it generally makes them more confident and comfortable in having those conversations with us when they meet us. Now, taking that example, if we basically look at extrapolating that to, say, organizations which have people working with different backgrounds or coming from different places, or having different let's say cultural sensitivities and values and beliefs, how would that help benefit the organization? So if I look at that as an option, a diverse workforce will not only look at increasing, say, for example, creativity within the organization, but it will also sometimes lead to increased productivity. And this would mean, because the organization is able to deal with a diverse set of people, you are able to take on and speak to different people from different cultural background, because you have somebody internally. If you get stuck somewhere in the communication, or if you do feel that the person might require interpretation, or might require some assistance, then in those cases, you as an individual feel very confident that as a company, we are able to deal with all sorts of inquiries and all issues, because we've got somebody coming from that background, that country, or that location, and he or she would understand the nuances of what the patient or the person is coming from. And this, in general, allows the company to become more accessible. It allows the company to become, let's say, more adaptable, to be able to work with different kinds of situations when or problems if they arise within the organization while working. Now, if we understand the diversity and if we allow inclusion, then it also makes and has an effect on what is called employees' performance, and obviously their satisfaction while working within the particular job role. And this is because they feel that the company cares for them. They feel that the company is some people within the organization actually understand their needs and requirements, and this makes them more loyal towards the organization, because they feel I can approach somebody in the organization if I have issues, and that person or that particular individual will be able to resolve my issues or complaints because they understand where I come from and what are my beliefs and values. Now, we could also look at other aspects of, or other benefits of that is, it helps in the language and communication skills. If you have diverse workforce, obviously you can deal with different types of customers or patients, and that would mean that somebody within the organization will have some sort of, let's say, connectivity with a particular culture or patient, and in those cases, they would make it easier for them to deal with from a point of view of communication and language skills. There could be sometimes advantages of solving diverse problems or mitigation of risks. Sometimes people can be biased, and if people are biased, then it can lead to let's say outcomes which are not desired. But if you have people which are from diverse culture working within the organization, somebody can then advise the other individual, no, you doing this would not be correct in this case, because in their culture this is considered this, or this is considered harmful, or this is something which they don't like, and that would help you in mitigating risks, or the employees, when they are dealing with diverse patients, this will help you in obviously reducing any risks which could happen because of the patient the worker not understanding the patient's rights and beliefs. So in some cases, you would see that one of the benefits tend to be allowing the mitigation of risk to happen as far as diverse cultural understanding is concerned within the workforce. Now, it can also help you into dealing more effectively with legal and ethical issues, if I may say so. The reason I say this is because sometimes within the health and social care sector, people are faced with the dilemma: should this be done, should not be done, should I give the medicine or should I not give the medicine, should I consult the doctor? There are lots of ethical and dilemmas which the staff could face because the staff does create a bit of a bond when they are dealing with patients over a period of time, and this bonding can create what are called, ethical considerations or dilemmas in the minds of staff, which is providing these services to the patient. So in some cases, you would see that when we have to deal with these complicated matters like legal and ethical considerations, then in those cases, having a diverse cultural or diverse workforce would help, because the organization, would be complying with the legal requirements, and this would mean that the employees which are working understand the diverse requirements, and they will inform their employer accordingly, and the employer can accordingly work to demonstrate their commitments towards, the ethical practices. And this could also be helpful and beneficial, for the organization in the long run. So as I can put it this way, there are a number of benefits that you can think of which would be there for the organization to employ a diverse workforce, and they could be ranging from legal and ethical considerations to enhanced problem solving approach, to looking at better communication and skills, and removal of, say, barriers which could come in while communicating with staff, employees, or patients in general, and their family members in general. And last but not the least, it could help in the company being able to better manage the employee performance and loyalty of the employee towards the organization. So these are some of the benefits of having a multicultural or a diverse workforce within your organization. Is that okay? Any questions?
Sir, I have a question.
Go ahead.
In all the lecture, we mainly talked about the advantages of a multicultural force, which is all accurate. But
Sure.
what if we encounter problems? For example, in Pakistan, it's a common belief that when a person or when a female wants to consult a gynecologist, they want it to be female under any condition because of the cultural preferences and the religious beliefs. So what if a patient gives his own preference of a doctor? Is that preferred in UK, or the system would instead tell them that the doctor being male or female, all is okay? How are these sort of problems solved in an organization?
So it's a good question, because there are, let's put it this way, I can address this two ways. Now, when we look at, as you
Okay, sir.
mentioned, within the Indian subcontinent, there are certain professions within the medical side which are more taken up by, I would say, the organizations there would employ more of female doctors. So like pediatrics, gynecologists, they would be
Yes, sir.
departments wherein people, or in this case, the HR or the organization would be, aware of the cultural differences and requirements within, because of the, the requirements of the, let's say, population. And in those cases,
Yes.
what will happen is the employment on certain roles, they would prefer to have a particular type of individual, say more females or more males, because that would be suitable and beneficial for that particular organization. So when I look at medical profession, there are a number of areas in which, female doctors, are preferred, over, male doctors. And they could be, for example, in certain categories of profession, which would be, say, pediatrics and gynecologists, or in general, when we look at, people working with, say, even within nurses, why just doctors, nurses, for example, in certain wards, like maternity wards, and here in the UK as well, when you look at the triage teams, which are there in the maternity wards, most of them would be, midwives, and others would be females. But in order to look at sometimes inclusion, and in order to look at preferred forms of, let's say, preferred employability in terms of some of these professions, I think it is clearly established and understood that you would probably have a certain type of professions which will suit, more females, and there will be requirement of more males in certain professions than females. So when we look at patients on the other side, for example, if you are undergoing an operation and you're undergoing an operative surgery, there
Yes, sir.
in the discussions with the patient, even before you have that operative surgery, or before you go into that surgery, there are discussions with the head nurse or the consultant or the doctor. And these are things which are discussed with the patient in terms of their preferences and likings, so that it is not going to be an issue when it comes to recovery. And obviously, after the operation or the surgery has happened, they would not feel hesitant or not be able to communicate. And this could become an impediment in the case of patient, recovering from that surgery. So these things, if you look at the impact of gender, in particular in certain professions, it tends to be treated in a way wherein it is understood, and sometimes these nuances are taken into account when we look at employing people within that particular category. And I think in some professions, it will be expected that it will be more female doctors who would be more suited, because in those cases, discussions with the members, say, for example, with the patient, would be important and would be more easily done than having those discussions with the members of the, family members of that patient. Is that okay? Does it answer your question?
Yes, sir, completely.
Yeah.
So also I had another question. When people from multiple beliefs or religions work together, or cultural beliefs, you can say, don't they encounter problems when working with each other, or there's a specific code that is followed in all these organizations?
Well, this is where the policies and procedures and awareness training and events come into play. So it is well understood that now, if I look at within the NHS, there are 7 or 8 different religions which are employees from different backgrounds. When I say is the religious backgrounds, they are employed within the NHS. So the formation of, say, for example, the prayer room, because for example, Muslims, they pray 5 times in a day. So in certain setups wherein the population, or when I say population, what I mean by that is the population of employees, if it is there is in greater numbers than in certain other places, then some of these provisions have been made in discussions with the organization, because that is where the organization is looking at embracing inclusion and is looking at embracing diversity. So when they take on employees, they understand that this is the requirements, these are the requirements, and at some stage, this would not have been there. But over the years, what has happened is, as employees have faced a bit of discrimination or have had, let's say, treatment wherein they felt that they have been left out, then over the years, these complaints, feedback, constructive mechanisms of, working with the employees have allowed the organizations to become culturally aware of these requirements. And over the years, this has now started to happen. I don't think this was there about 30 years back, or, if I talk 40 years back, but now it is there in most hospitals wherein, for example, there is a room for multiple faith, wherein people can go and do prayers, even patients and family members go. So these things have been recognized, but they've been, let's put it this way, they were not there from the beginning. But as these requirements have arisen, organizations like NHS have realized, and they have included this by implementing their policies and procedures in such a way that there are no such conflicts arise, or if they do arise, then the procedures of the policies are used to resolve these conflicts at the managerial level or at the individual hospital level itself. They don't go up to the head office or other places, because that is where these policies have been further expanded into procedures. If there's a problem, then please follow this procedure, discuss it out, and sort it out.
Okay, sir.
So it could be that there are certain, obviously this is not prevalent globally. If I put it this way, things are still not developed in certain countries, and in certain countries these are now coming in because of being discussed. First and foremost is we don't see these discussions happening, but now with these discussions happening, what we do see is that people are becoming more aware of these problems and situations, and that is where companies and organizations are implementing these policies on equality and diversity and inclusion.
Okay, sir.
Okay, let's look at briefly the third assessment criteria for this learning outcome, which is now looking at what are the various strategies that we can use to manage the workforce. Now, if I look at strategies, and if I talk about, when we use the word strategy, what we mean, by that is we are looking at a long-term, solution, because sometimes some of these things cannot be looked at, from a short-term basis. And when we look at, looking at creating this from a long-term perspective, or talking about putting planning or processes in place which are going to be, for use in the future, the plan of action that we develop, or the, if I would put it this way, the strategy, or in general, the plan of action that we develop, is to be developed in a way which will basically help us become more productive and more efficient within the organization. So in general, when we talk about, some of these strategies that can be used, they would include things which will start from the very first stage, which would be recruitment and selection. So if things have to be put into practice, you can't just put the icing on the top of the cake. You have to start from the place where the baking of the cake actually starts.
Beginning.
So when we look at, beginning, that's correct. So when we look at putting this into place, it has to be put into place at the start, which is recruitment. And in recruitment, the approach has to be, including, basic bits which are given out in terms of job description, advertisements. There we are making it very clear that, we are an equal opportunity employer. We will be looking at, say, for example, writing job descriptions which are going to be put out, which are going to have, or put equal weightage on, both types of candidates when we talk about female, males, and LGBT and things like that today, especially within the Western context. And the process through which recruitment and selection will go through will be very clearly laid out, so that it becomes fair, and people are aware of if there are any reasonable adjustments which have to be applied. For example, somebody coming in for the interview, and one of the things which employers have to ensure is that if people are having a disability or they are on wheelchair, then the interview should be organized in a location wherein people have access, or people with disability also have equal access to that venue. So to that extent and detailing, we will need to go to ensure that, we are practicing this from the start. So the first step when we talk about applying a strategy would be to look at making the organization more open and more welcoming. And in those cases, you're going to start from primarily, putting out your equality and diversity policy, and also look at any D&I or diversity and, inclusion D&I initiatives if the organization has. And along with that, that starts with the process of recruitment. Now, when it comes to people working within the organization and obviously, going through their daily routines and job roles, which is where they will be, managed on a day-to-day basis, or day-to-day management would come in. In those cases, you would be looking at, ensuring that, things which are required in terms of resources, or things which are required for people to be able to work together, are made available. So that means training and development at the start, after the recruitment process is complete, so that they are aware that we are a diverse organization. We have so many nationalities, so many different types of religion, race, people working within the organization. These are the various roles, and raising that awareness through training would again ensure that people are culturally sensitive to the requirements of other colleagues and individuals working within the organization. That could be a second strategy. The third obviously would be looking at leadership. So for example, the people at the top, or people in management, essentially clearly understand what is diversity, how do they look at seeking a diverse workforce, and obviously working with that diverse workforce, they at times recognize and achievements which have been done. They put let's say they put emphasis in place to ensure that there is equal competition amongst staff and staff members, and they do not favor any one over